Devin Spence. I work for Copilot. I was super excited actually to be invited to this event because a couple years ago, these are the types of events that I went to, trying to figure out and like navigate being in New York and what I was going to do with my life. So it's really kind of full circle to be able to come and share my story, and then hopefully you guys can share your story and have a little bit going on. But I was really trying to reflect because a lot of people ask me like, hey, you have a political science degree, you have an MBA in healthcare, like you work for a hospital, you work for a nonprofit, like how did you get into tech, right? And then how are you able to excel so quickly in tech over the past like 5 or 6 years? And I used to say like, well, I kind of fell into it, right? Very vague answer. And my mom would be like, oh, she's just lucky, which is also a really answer I don't like. So trying to figure out what the secret sauce is really to tell people and like allow people to excel really kind of took me back. I was thinking about it, and then I recently read this book, and I'm not advertising for the book, but it's really good. It's called The Ideal Team Player. Raising hand, does anybody? All right. Thank you. They talk about the ideal team player is someone who's hungry, humble, and smart. And that's the person that can work like in any industry, can be a leader, can really cultivate a team. And like that's totally true, but I think if you bring that into women in tech, it's like even more true, right? Because like we have to be a little bit more humble because there are a lot of obstacles going on. And we are in a field that we're completely outnumbered, even though we decide that we're not sometimes, but it's just the facts of life. So I kind of want to talk about my journey and how I got to where I am, and then how I kind of talked about, or how I incorporated those values, right, without really knowing it. And now being super conscious of it, I can make myself better, right? So way back, a couple decades ago, I was like a super nerdy kid, which is really hard to believe, right?
Yeah.
And like I always wanted to be a lawyer. Like it's probably because my parents let me watch like Law and Order way too much. But like I was the kid that like dressed up as RBG for Halloween. Like that was me. And I was super excited, right? So I was very tunnel vision. I was like, all right, I'm gonna be like a trial club, and I'm gonna go to college, I'm gonna study political science, I'm gonna go to law school, and everything was great. And I was doing that, and I was in undergrad, and it was like 2 days before graduation. I had already taken LSAT.
I apologize.
Yeah. And I realized this is not what I want to do, right? Like, do I really want to like go into all this debt for something that I'm actually not that passionate about? It's just something that I kind of drilled into my head is what the next step was, right? So I graduated. I was like, oh, shit. Like, what am I going to do? So thankfully, like when I was working, I had one of those campus jobs in fundraising, right? So I was like, grass and shrubs. I'm a decent fundraiser. Let me do that. So I started working at a nonprofit in East Harlem. And if anyone has worked at a nonprofit, anybody? You know what's up, right? Like you do everything. Like you're doing like data analytics, you're like moving groceries, like everything imaginable. So by working there, I got into Salesforce, right? We were using Salesforce and PSP. I personally hated it because we didn't know how to use it. We weren't using it efficiently. So as stuff started to change and roles started to change, I became the admin, which is ridiculous for like my skill set back then. But I was like, all right, I can do this. So it was really like, we had no budget, right? So we couldn't like hire a consulting firm. So it was, okay, Deb, watch some YouTube videos and make me a report so we know how many donations we got. Like very base level stuff. So I started doing that, playing around. Realized that it's actually a really cool tool when you know how to use it, which is important. And then the nonprofit life was fun while it lasted, but it was a little too much, right? So I switched careers and started working in a hospital, again in fundraising. And it was a little bit of luck that at the time I joined the hospital, they were using Excel, right? And I was like, hey, just like buy one license and like let me do it. So they let me do it. And the hospital I was at was a very big hospital, and they were in a point of concept review between Epic and Salesforce, right? So they were very much on Salesforce's radar. So little old me had a license, and they're like, okay, let's invite her to everything, right? And I was like, listen, I'm very low on the total quality, like, doesn't matter. So I'd go to all these events, and again, be very honest, and just be like, yeah, I know how to do a report, right? And I became the admin and just getting more confident with it, right? So I met someone working for a really big consulting firm in the city that had an academy type program. And I was like, yeah, let's do this, I'm excited. So I was the person like on Trailhead at like 2 a.m., like trying to get badges to like at least have a conversation about it. So I went through the interview process, and it was like a personality test, like 4 or 5 different rounds of interviews. I had to write an essay. It was like the most extreme process I've ever been in. And they're supposed to have an academy for 6 or 7 people. It's 6 weeks. It's like very intense. You come out, you're like an all-star consultant. Awesome. They just hired me. No one else. And they're like, well, it doesn't really make sense financially to run through the program, so we're gonna give you like a boot camp that's gonna be like 10 days. And it was like right after Christmas, so obviously everybody was out. And then you're client facing, right?
Oh my god.
So like, what do you do? And it was really like a turning point, right? And I was talking to my husband about it. I was like, okay, am I gonna like rise to this, or am I gonna like back up, right? Because this is I changed career paths, right? I don't know anything about computer science. I can like barely change the source of my ITV, and like how am I supposed to like build these huge databases for these like financial firms and healthcare organizations and all that stuff? So again, I went back to Trailhead, and then I really took the opportunity because the consulting firm was so good. I was like, let me shadow everything I can, right? Any second that I wasn't billable, let me get on this call. Let me like drive to go on site somewhere just to like sit there, right? And learn how to do it. And from there, I got my MBA in healthcare, worked for pharma for a little bit, and financial services, and now I found myself at Copilot, which is a very supportive organization, right? And I can really thrive there. But taking a step back on the like hungry, humble, and smart situation, like I feel I'm a very hungry person, like I eat a lot, but also I'm always looking for the next step, right? So like anytime I start something, I'm like, okay, where is this gonna go? And trying to think like 2-3 steps ahead. I think that's really important when you're looking for a job because it changed my mentality, right? I was like, okay, I want to be a lawyer, I'm so focused on this. But instead, now I'm like, okay, I want to be challenged, right? And like, I don't know what title that is, and it doesn't really matter what title that is, and I don't know like a branded name, like, hey, I want to work for Google, or I want to work for Salesforce. It's just like, every day I want to be challenged. And that's how I get motivated, right? And then it's also like going that extra mile and like putting in the extra work and like showing up, which is like so important. And I work from home most of the time, and like it's so hard to put clothes on and show up somewhere, right? But like it's so important because if you don't show up, then everyone says networking, and yeah, it's true and it's really difficult, but like you have to be there, right? And that's like the first step. And then you never know who's talking to who, and the more you start talking to people, the more you realize that like not everyone's from MIT, right? In this industry, people are like liberal arts and everything else, and it's really the skill set. And I think we were talking about this earlier, that the tech is something that you can learn, but the people skills is what's really difficult, right? So I think like a really diverse workforce of the liberal arts and the English majors and everything else, like you really have an edge as long as you're confident enough in putting the work to learn the technology, right? So they kind of go hand in hand. So that's like the hungry part. The humble part comes in being a woman in tech, right? And I really didn't feel it as much until I got into pharma. So I was working in pharma, and I was at a level where I was like running these like multi-million-dollar projects and going on site all the time, and just like being a one-lady show, right, for a company. And I would show up, and I had a client in the Midwest that I had to go to like every single month, and it was me with like 5 guys, right, and I was just running meetings from like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. every single day. And I got to the point where we were sitting there, and they're all just like kind of staring at me. And I was like, hey guys, what's up? And they're like, you know, we've been thinking, and we want to ask you something, but like we don't really know how to ask you. And I was like, we spend so much time together, just like say it. And they were like, well, like you travel a lot. And I was like, yeah, because you guys make me come here. And they were like, does your husband have a problem with that? And I was like, no. And they're like, well, like what does he eat when you're away? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, like, do you cook and like you have food for him? Like when you leave, like how does that work? And it was, they're like totally, like not joking. And like the jersey came out, obviously. And I like, but like looking back, right? I digressed a little bit. I think it's important that, like in that moment, I was like, damn, like it's not fair yet, right? Like there's all these events and there's all this liberal stuff and like yeah, Rosie Riveter. But like when you're really in the weeds, like we're really outnumbered, right? And that was a super humbling experience. And I think the best way to combat that, I should not have bitten their head off. Looking back, and I've matured, but it's important to be like, hey, I'm going to run this project like the best project they've ever seen, right? I'm going to come in under budget, I'm going to be above the timeline, I'm going to give them the best possible solution so like they cannot live without me. And then it turned they went back and like we had another project and they're like, okay, we want Devin. And they're like, sure you want another resource? Like I heard you had some friction. And they're like, no, only her, right? I think that's really important. Like as we move forward, like you're gonna get the flack all the time, but like rather than responding to it, just show it by your character and show it by like your skill set and really like own the room when you get in there. And then the third aspect is being smart, right? So like obviously like it takes some intelligence to be in technology, but it's really the smarts of like networking and understanding people, right? And especially in consulting, I know this tech thing is a lot, but consulting is a pretty huge chunk of it. In the consulting space, you pass somebody and you have an interaction with them, and then you might not talk to them for like a year, right? Even if you're in the same firm, because it's like project-based. So it's really important to have that first impression, which again is so difficult. But like if you're gonna do something for someone, like whether you're assigned as a BA or just have some sort of interaction with them, like that has to be the very best thing. And that's why this industry is so difficult, because you always have to be on, right? You always have to be 100%, because that's the impression that someone's like, oh, did you work with Devin? And they can be like, oh yeah, like she showed up in sweatpants, she didn't know what she was talking about, she had a really off day. And that like burns you, you know what I mean? So being smart in that respect, and also being smart and being marketable. So like, yeah, you're in tech, right? And again, you can learn tech, but if you have industry expertise, you're like a double whammy, right? So like I was in nonprofit, I started working for a firm, I was in healthcare. On the side, I would still help the nonprofit because the technology is moving so rapidly that when you're out of it for 6 months, like you don't know what the new release is, you don't know what it is, and it's just really difficult. So even then, when I was working for pharma, I was doing side projects for FinServ, right? Now I'm FinServ, and I'm still like reading all the logs for pharma, because the more marketable you are, everything changes so fast in such a small ecosystem. It's really important just to have as many options as you possibly can. I think I'm running over, but
You're fine.
the last thing I want to talk about is like, I don't know, it sounds super crappy, but like a call to action, right? Just bear with me as I say this. So I've noticed being in the industry and also being with clients, and you interact, like when you're a consultant, like you just go into a company, right? You're fully submersed. Then like 6 months later, you're completely out, right? So you get a lot of different views. And I see that when women get into these higher positions, they have one or two approaches. Either they become very critical and a little bit old-fashioned, almost like, okay, I had to go through all of this stuff to get here. You need to pay your dues, right? As another woman in tech. And it becomes so difficult because it's just feeding the cycle. And then there's other women that are like, listen, it was really, really hard. Let me try to make it easier for you, right? So like, let me extend a hand, let me mentor you, let me answer questions before you even have them type of thing. And I challenge like the people in this room and the people that you work with to hold them accountable, but also be the latter, right? Like you see a younger woman or you see a woman who's changing careers, right? And just like, be nice. Like, what's it, like real queens fix each other's crowns? I think that's a thing.
Yeah, without telling the world they're crooked.
Yeah, okay, thank you for the layup. But yeah, I think that's the most important thing, and I think that's how we're successful, and I think that's how we really infiltrate the system, right? Is like laying that extra hand and being like, okay, there's not a lot of us here, let's help each other out. If you need help, I have an open door, right? So that being said, if you guys find me on LinkedIn, definitely happy to lend a hand. And thank you again for having me.